Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia Chapter 300. Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. This is going to be a really fun little chapter. I got some general notes, actually quite a lot of general notes that will go a little bit into looking at the pages as we go through. And then the page by page walkthrough, it'll be a good time. Now this is Chapter 300. People were hoping that Chapter 300 was going to be monumental, and then some people were sad because it wasn't monumental, but it's like, I'm looking at the chapter and it's like, oh no, this is definitely monumental. This is a very monumental chapter. When you look though at the past of Hero Academia, chapter 100 is pretty much Mei's boobs. Chapter 200 was pretty much Shoto hyping up Momo for her eventual defeat. And then chapter 300, actually, of the three chapters, I think this one is significantly more monumental. The big thing here is, of course, Rei and Endeavor seeing each other for the first time. And I know that the people who do not like Endeavor will see this and they will scoff at it because this is not what they want. But the reality is, when you look at what the story is doing, I don't know what to tell you other than Endeavor is a main character. It's really interesting what's happened with the story here, and I think this is going to be the first big general note that we really have to talk about, that being the entire thing with how Endeavor is being premised. So before beginning on Endeavor, I will just say last week I was not sure, or sorry, 2 weeks ago, I was not sure if that was Rei that had come to visit Shoto. And in my mind, I was thinking because it would be unreasonable to let Rei out during a crisis. And I still have that opinion. I still think it's unreasonable to let Rei out to see a person that she has no experience seeing for the last couple or so years. How many years? Like maybe 10 years so far? I don't remember. You do not trust people in crisis to do well during a crisis. That's counterintuitive. These kind of things would usually be resolved by slowly making sure that the person could stand being in the same room as the aggressor that put them in that room in the first place. That said, this is a fictional series. If they want to go and let Rei out, all that we have to hope for is that Rei doesn't have a nervous breakdown after 10 minutes of talking to Endeavor. If she has a nervous breakdown, which I think is extremely unlikely, if she has a nervous breakdown after talking 10 minutes to Endeavor, we can be like, okay, legitimately, Horikoshi is saying that whatever hospital let her out were insane. And then we can talk about that, because if Horikoshi acknowledges the insanity, it's a different thing than just in general. Anyway, point is, I have my personal misgivings, but it's a manga, whatever. Hero Academia isn't the best for mental health anyway, so we can just assume that. Anyway, that aside, that's really the only gripe I had for the chapter, and it's not even that big of a gripe. Going into this whole situation with Endeavor. So what's important to consider is that ultimately, the Izuku plot has been put on hold for Endeavor, for 2 chapters of Endeavor. And you might be wondering, like, how is it 2 chapters? Well, no, you have to remember, the previous chapter, Hawks' chapter, is ultimately a chapter setting up how Hawks is going to help out Endeavor. And by the end of this chapter, you ultimately have 2 parties coming in to help Endeavor in total. You have Hawks, and then you have his family. And look, when you look at his family, they are coming in there. When you see Endeavor in this chapter, the way that Horikoshi has drawn Endeavor, how much he is showing his vulnerability, and also some of the funny faces he's making, and also some of the really beautiful faces he's making. When you have that kind of vulnerability, when you have this guy introspecting, when you have the guy acknowledging weakness, it's because we're about to see, this is the descent, and we're about to see that wonderful curve upwards. That's what's ultimately going on here. We now have 2 characters who are coming in to build up Endeavor. And going back to Rei, let me just tell you, any misgivings I might have had with Rei coming in here, they were made a lot better the moment I saw her holding that flower. Like, man, people on the live stream can vouch for me. When I saw that flower, my heart melted. I was just like, okay, yeah, whatever. I don't care. I love it. I want to see more of the flower. And ultimately, that flower is a symbol of Rei and Endeavor's relationship. It's the flower that she liked. It's the flower that he kept bringing her, right? And that's why we know that we are going to go towards a positive outcome, even though the road to that positive outcome might be a little bit harsh. Now, another thing that's worth pointing out when it comes to the narrative that's occurring behind Endeavor is that you have the narration in the chapter saying, hey, Endeavor, he's the guy that has all the responsibility. Everyone's looking to him right now. Like, all the heroes that are falling out, all the heroes that are quitting, like as the chapter says, the public is putting the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of one person. Really clever little thing. When this happens, what is ultimately occurring is that Endeavor is going to be either the fall guy or the guy that everyone's going to look to. It's either Endeavor's a symbol of this era, or he's about to become something else. And the reason that this is important is that when you have this kind of rhetoric of all of the people's anger and worries being put on the shoulders of one person, quite literally, you don't have to fix society anymore in terms of a narrative. You just have to make this person rise or fall. Either Endeavor takes the blame and bows out, or he rises above. And so what's most likely going to happen here, if we're going towards a positive kind of look at this thing, is that Endeavor is going to become a rallying cry. After Endeavor is through his dark night of the soul, the darkest point in the hero's journey, after he's through that, he's going to come out. He's probably going to use his same old rhetoric of just watch me, and he might serve as a rallying cry that is able to appease some of the civilians, and is also maybe able to get some of the heroes back. Like, he's ultimately going to become a beacon. Now, I do have some misgivings with this. In general, making people symbols like this is not a good practice. I understand it in narratives. I don't think this is healthy in the context of Hero Academia society. We shouldn't have one person standing out above the rest. We shouldn't have all the responsibility being lauded on one person. People have to like open up their minds and realize how much of a complex machine this is. We have to adapt some of the villains' methodology here and acknowledge that society creates a good chunk of the villains. We need to take that factor into account, and we also need to take into account how the government body works with the hero body, and how the civilians play a factor in all of that. That's why when you have the situation where all the blame is, or all the responsibility is being placed on Endeavor's shoulders, it's just a very quick and easy way of, instead of having to show the perspective of an entire society or like the changes within every individual person, you just make Endeavor be like the overall metaphor for everyone else. So ultimately what you need to know is that with Endeavor having this role, quite literally, how this is going to turn out, how society is going to turn out, or how society is going to recover is extremely linked to how well Endeavor recovers. And there's where you can kind of hear the situation. Society shouldn't be hinging on one person anymore. It should be a giant group. It should be the blame is equally placed on everyone. But we'll have to see. If I was to give you a quick plot, there was an anime a long time ago. I won't give the name so I don't spoil it in case someone is for some reason watching it, even though it's been years. But, you know, there was an anime where one of the big ideas was to get everyone in the world to hate the one guy. And then when that one guy died, you know, everything magically becomes a lot better because he had sucked up all the hatred. It was a very big hate message. That's dumb. It's cool for narrative, but it's ultimately a very dumb plot point. Just because that's not how things would work out, and you can kind of imagine, like, just because one person becomes hated, it's not going to just wipe out everything. People forget. People always forget. That's the situation that Hero Academia is actually in. People forgot how shitty things were like 5 generations ago, and that's why they're all acting out now, panics, because this is a population that was born in an era of peace. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I am excited to see how this is going to go. What we have to look at here, because right now, since society's health is linked to Endeavor's health, we have to see if Horikoshi wants to go with a cynical route or if he wants to go to a positive route. But there's no doubt about it. This is Endeavor's story. And I do have to remind you, right now Endeavor's back is against the wall. And Horikoshi said that this story is about people with backs against the wall. Endeavor is handling an issue that Izuku will never handle. But Endeavor is also handling a much more gray issue in general with everything going on in his situation. Izuku doesn't have the ability nor the experience to be able to handle an issue like this. So right now we have to be ready because Endeavor is the poster boy of complex issues, and we're gonna see where exactly Horikoshi wants to take this. But at this point in time, this is a monumental Endeavor chapter. Moving on. The next general note is about society and the people breaking stuff. So I was really happy to see this. When I'm looking at society in this chapter, what I'm ultimately really thinking is, I keep thinking of this. There's a thought in spiritual teachings called, or like the general concept is harmony through conflict. And the idea of that is just that for a good chunk of souls on their journey in reincarnation, they need to learn harmony by experiencing strife first. And you might think about it, you can hear about that, like some of the more Eastern philosophies that take into account more of trial through fire and all that. You can see that that kind of idea would be there more. But you can apply this idea to society here in general. What's important to remember is that Izuku is ultimately going to be a great hero one day, right? Because he's going to be a great hero, that stands to say that society has to be somewhere for him to be a great hero. Society ultimately is going to make it through. Now, what that ultimately says is that it tells us that we're going towards an idealized ending, and we're not going to be in cynical times for very long. This is going to be a permanent fixture. And what that ultimately means is that we can apply ideal endings for society. And right now for society, when I look at this chapter, what I'm seeing is people, after the panic has subsided, they're going to look at this period and they're going to be thinking like, oh shit, being a hero is actually really hard. And the reason we can say that that's going to be the conclusion is because look at what happened in this chapter, right? You saw, or you had the narration flat out telling you the civilians getting in fights with villains make the situation much more difficult. They make the situation much more dangerous. We saw the damage that occurred after a civilian versus villain fight. This was really good. It was really good that Horikoshi was willing to show how this situation would play out. Last week, I reminded everyone that watched that the hero license ultimately is something that is there to say that the person has good judgment. Look at what we had in this situation. It was a lack of judgment. These people don't know what they're doing. This is exactly what the heroes are there for. What's going to happen, most likely, because we are going towards an idealized ending, is that people are going to come in here. The civilians are going to watch what these guys are doing. They're going to see that the civilians fighting the villains causes massive property damage, and they're going to think, oh shit, the heroes don't cause this kind of damage. What's going to happen is that give this time, let the panic subside, and then eventually someone's kid is going to die. And once that happens, the civilians are going to turn on each other. There's going to be civilians complaining at the other one like, hey, why did you break down my house fighting that villain? Why couldn't you do better? The same way that they're being vicious to the heroes right now, if the heroes, they are lucky that people like Wash are still standing by, because if the heroes dissolve, then that anger, it's going to go somewhere else, and it's going to go to the people that end up killing someone's kid accidentally, and that's most likely going to be the civilians. Society is about to understand how hard the job is for heroes once that panic subsides. Now, mind you, mentioning the civilians that are making things worse with all the property damage, I do want to mention this idea that we had a long time ago about the villains making their own Batmans. The villains are in a really bad spot, because now you have so many people running around with guns. Whereas when you had the heroes, at least you were going to get a nice stay in a prison. Now you might actually end up dying. The villains are going to be in a really rough spot, and we have to see how this is ultimately going to turn out for the villains. Again, when you see that whole situation with everyone fighting each other with quirks, just take away the quirks and just imagine everyone with guns. Different guns dependent on how powerful their quirk is. And that's ultimately what you have here. You have civilians and armed criminals fighting with weapons that they probably shouldn't be using. Just imagine the kind of mayhem that would occur in these kind of fights. Like, some people have bazookas, another person has a nuke, some person has a pea shooter, that kind of stuff, right? But that kind of chaos is going to be very interesting, and I'm very happy that the author ultimately is willing to show it. And now we just have to wait for the there is going to be a little bit of a cycle here. We do need to go through all the paranoia. It's going to be, again, linked to Endeavor. We need to see how society is going to react the moment that Endeavor recovers and makes a statement and says something inspiring, like, I'm not giving up, or something like that. It's going to be really interesting. But right now, society is very quickly going to learn that this is not what they want. And society is very quickly going to learn that they have to start blaming the villains. Now, we're going to go into the page-by-page walkthrough. And there are more points that have to do with these bigger general notes, and we'll talk about them as we get to the pages, because there are a few more interesting little details, especially when it comes to the psyche of the public that we're seeing in Hero Academia. But before that, I do want to remind you, another thing that tells us that everything's going to be okay, the use of comedy. In this chapter, we have two significant comedic moments. One was Shoto's face and Endeavor shouting Shoto like old times. And we also had the first page with Nomu pointing at themselves. Like, Horikoshi keeps doing this. He sometimes slots in funny moments and I think really tense moments. But it's just because when you have him doing this, it's just him reminding you like, hey, you know, shit might suck, but we can still have a laugh here. Shit might suck, but I'm okay using Nomu who are terrorizing the world as a joke, as a visual gag. I don't mind making you laugh at these murderous machines. That's ultimately what tells you, don't get too invested in everything being dark and, you know, full of despair. Like, yeah, things might get like really bad in the process, but we're ultimately trending into the positives. When you can have the moment to laugh, that does ultimately break the atmosphere, and it just also ultimately just serves to remind you this is a story that we have to go for the fun of it, and we're right now in the dark part of the heroic journey. So with the page-by-page walkthrough, a lot of it's pretty simplistic, so I don't think we'll stay too long in this section. So page 1, I think it was interesting that they made a distinction with urban areas. I believe that chances are is that the rural areas most likely stayed the same, because from what the story has told us, the rural areas are more likely to be overlooked. And we can make that assumption based on what Spinner said about his own rural area that he came from. So very interesting, and I do think the fact that they specified it as urban is what really tells us the rural areas are probably unaffected. Will that play into the plot in the future? No idea. Next up, the villains. I think in these silhouettes I could recognize Muscular and Moonfish, and I think this might be Redestro. Like, he has like the bald person slope. There's the hairstyle. The problem is that Redestro's nose is significantly bigger than that silhouette. But I honestly don't know. It looks like such a distinct silhouette. I would say maybe it could be like just an art error. Or ultimately, I think Redestro got busted out somewhere. I don't know. Like, there were 6 jails attacked. He probably got released again. But we'll have to see. Just keep an eye out for this one. I would think that would be Redestro, but that's just like, that's the simplest answer. Redestro with an art error. Anyway, moving on, the Nomu panel, I thought it was funny. It's funny, like all the Nomu are pointing at themselves. It was cool. We'll be going to page 2 that continues off of the Nomu thing, and it's really interesting that we actually got a callback to those rumors that Hawks talked about way back when. Like, pretty neat. I like that callback. On this page, I do want to note this particular panel. As the rumors grew more pervasive, so did people's anxieties and fears. Anxieties and fears is actually a pretty big thing for the chapter, and we will point it out as we go through it. Page 3 has the people Bakugo and Shoto took down, and they are back at it again. Rehabilitation doesn't really work in Hero Academia, and we see the civilians fighting back. All in all, I think it's great that the civilians are fighting back, because only in them experiencing war will they understand the people who fight in that war every single day. Anyway, page 4 has civilians versus villains as Redestro's words come back. So I didn't think it would link here like this, so this is definitely a nice surprise. It's also important to note that the civilians are ultimately playing into the hands of the people who caused this trouble, especially when you see Redestro on that page. Detonarat is probably not the one with only the stuff on the market, but they are a significant presence within the market. They probably have a significant market share. So whenever these guys go out and buy their support gear, they're putting money in the pockets of Detonarat if those accounts are still open. So I do wonder how the civilians would feel knowing that they bought from the terrorists that caused the situation. What you should take away from this is that the civilians are ultimately still being played even when they think they're protecting themselves. The scariest villains are the ones that put themselves in situations where they always profit. That is the kind of evil that you don't really want to think about, the one that always wins. For a quick example, you know, like, what does it matter if people complain at one of your businesses if your other business is the one that enables them to complain in the first place? Like, that's the situation that Redestro ultimately created. He's supplying the tools for people to defend themselves from the chaos that he caused, ultimately playing right into his hands. Page 5. This was my favorite page, of course. The author not shying away from the consequences of villains versus civilians who don't know how to use their quirks. I really can't wait to see the civilians turn on each other for not being good enough. Like it's actually something I really hope people get called out for. They will still use the insane logic like we saw in these pages to make it the hero's fault. Like, oh, hey, we broke down the buildings because the heroes didn't show up for us, blah blah blah. And it'll be like that, but it's like ultimately it's the hysteria. But at that note, hysteria won't last very long because like even at the rate that they're going, the amount of destruction that one fight caused is like, yeah, this is why I said a long time ago that what Shigaraki wants is ultimately anti-society. When you have this kind of stuff, society isn't going to progress. And we already know that that's very likely in Hero Academia society, because that's exactly what happened when the quirk phenomena first happened. Society stopped progressing, and that's ultimately what the villains are pushing for. Again, it's just a matter of how long the hysteria is going to last. Page 6, really critical page. First with the civilian. Note the tears. It's important to note that these people are in a full-blown panic. They've been thrust into an unknown situation and they don't really know what to do. Thankfully, our world recently went through a panic, so we can use that as an example. Remember how at the start of COVID, people were buying up toilet paper for no real reason? Like, it's the same phenomena beneath it. When thrust into a new situation, people scramble, they panic, and they end up doing ill-advised things because doing that is better than doing nothing. But unfortunately, when you're doing things in the moment, sometimes you might get it right, but most of the time it's just going to end up being a waste of everyone's time. And in the worst situations, you end up making things worse for you and people around you. Now, this dialogue with this character is again super important. Note that this character was afraid of leaving the indoors. The people are noting that the civilians fighting is dangerous, especially compared to like how when people usually watch heroes doing their work. That's why this one is yelling at Wash. He's yelling at him because he knows that if Wash was there, the crossfire wouldn't have gotten as bad. Like, this civilian, even though he is yelling at Wash, he still wants Wash to save him. And when we're talking about like hysteria goggles, you know, he asks the questions of Wash, where were you? And it's like, bro, see the crazy destruction here? What are you gonna do if Wash was busy helping another person who got into a problem because the civilians were causing more destruction than required, right? It's that kind of situation. The people aren't getting the opportunity to actually think out their thought processes because it's just a massive moment of hysteria. But on this page, we got something good. Wash ignored the yelling and still did his job. Good on him. This is the guy who's rising to the occasion. And then when you look at this page along with page 7, you see that what Horikoshi did was that he made a comparison. You have Wash ignoring the criticism and helping in the best way he can, and then you have Yoroi folding. So he's retiring. As he says, he wanted to be appreciated. So this one is unfortunate, I think. Like, in normal circumstances, he's an old guy. Like, if he retired before the war started, before they knew the war was going to start, I don't think I would have complained, because it's like, he's an old guy. It's okay for him to retire. He might die otherwise. But right now, the optics aren't in his favor. So again, I can't fault him for retiring, given that he could die at any moment from old age. But losing a capable hero right now is really bad. It's really the worst time to do it. That said, I want to pull your attention here. This is a dialogue, once again, of someone who is scared. Do note, though, that this was a press conference. So it's journalists that are throwing things. And at that point, I have to say, like, journalists, you're the guys in control of the media. What are the regular people going to do when they see the journalists are doing this? This is actually really bad. The media is going to whip this up into an even worse frenzy. But again, we have to remember, this is hysteria and panic. In page 8, there was another critical thought slotted in there when we were finding out about the heroes abandoning their careers after Yoroi's sudden retirement. The thought that a peaceful society was a baseline. So that was really interesting to actually have it written out. We kind of touched on this on the chapter where this guy saw all that destruction. But yeah, for a good chunk of people, they probably never imagined something like this. And worse off, something that was done by human hands. But this line just reminds us that society was just much too peaceful and got complacent. And that effect carried over to the heroes as well. But we knew that that effect carried over to the heroes. Ever since Mount Lady gave those PR lessons to the kids, we had that confirmed, or heroes were starting to step up after All Might left. The heroes ultimately got complacent with the society that All Might created. Which brings us to the All Might statue, another image that shows anxiety and fear. And also that strange level of acknowledgement of the heroes. Note that the statue doesn't have graffiti. Instead, there's just a sign saying that All Might's not around anymore. When you look at that sign stands more as a symbol of hopelessness. And I thought that was really important. I think this is a cry for help, not one for disrespect. And for reference, just to really understand this might have been what the author was going for, check out this house. This is Gentle's house. That's what someone did to shame Gentle's family after he got in the way of a hero when Gentle was just trying to do his best. And they did that during a peaceful society. So look at that as a testament to how easy it is to disrespect something. And then look at All Might's statue. It is so pristine. There's no graffiti on it. Again, saying that the people respect the heroes, but they are in a state of hopelessness right now, and again, paranoia. Page 9. So this page is just really saying that the heroes are being filtered out. Are they going to be like Yoroi, or will they be like Wash, who stand against the criticism with their backs against the wall? Anyway, on this page we see Stain. First, I actually can't believe this guy is still wet. It seems like he's either super sweaty or he only recently came to shore after going for a swim. Now, mind you, this is a really weird panel. It's a really weird page. In context, it's 2 days after the Tartarus raid. When you see the water, the first indication is that he swam from Tartarus, but it's weird because of the 2 days. Also, the page is white, not black, to indicate a flashback. So I think we have to be really careful with making sense of this page because of the timeline issue. If Stain escaped Tartarus by swimming, then he should be dry 2 days later, unless he's really, really sweaty. If he only recently escaped Tartarus by swimming, then that, okay, you know what, that's really interesting. I would like to know what happened in those 2 days. If Horikoshi is trying to say that this happened 2 days ago, well then, this is not well constructed by the rules established by the manga to indicate flashbacks, at which point I have to say that's misleading. And also, I'm not sure if a store would be this ransacked after only half a day after the incident, but alternatively, the author could just be saying that Stain recently swam up a river. Again, I'm interested to know the exact situation that's occurring here. It's just I refuse to believe that this man spent 2 days swimming back to shore. Or at the very least, if he swam to shore point is there has to be a little bit more going on in there. But otherwise, I think it's a really good choice of having Stain for a page about filtering heroes. I really hope he only gives the villains tetanus with that sword. Page 10 says people are placing the responsibility on Endeavor, and we already talked about that. I do want to note in the crowd, this guy seems to be sitting on a ladder, and it looks like some of the reporters are trying to sneak a peek of Endeavor because their cameras are pointed right at Endeavor's perspective. So pretty ballsy for them to not give Endeavor a courtyard window. And also, cool to see a toad doctor, a mushroom doctor. Page 11 has the doctor leave the dramatically sized room while saying he's rooting for Endeavor. And that makes sense. The doctors probably see all kinds of crazy things, especially when they're on the cutting edge of developing resuscitation and false death induction techniques. And when you consider that they are learning those techniques from corpses, yeah, they probably have seen the depths of evil that All For One and the doctor have been involved in. Like, the doctors probably understand what kind of evil the heroes are dealing with the best. Page 12, that horrifying Dobby page gives me the nightmares, and Endeavor calling back to how he freezes up when his kids are involved. I mean, I get it. If I found out that Dobby was my son, I'd be really freaked out too. I mean, like, heck, I'd probably die of a heart attack. Honestly, Endeavor is a much stronger man than I am. Page 13, really brutal seeing Toya rip out his hair like that. This is once again a page that just tells me that Toya wanted Endeavor's attention. All Toya wanted was to be as cool as Endeavor hoped he would be. But we all know the story. Endeavor got tunnel vision and everything got worse from there. Anyway, Endeavor says he can't fight Dobby, and I thought this was good. It's just Endeavor continues to have a complex about his family. This is an established character trait. I think I can't fault him for being real about being unable to fight Dobby. Page 14 is a comedic page with Shoto. Page 15, his family arrives with Endeavor talking about his heartbreak. And just remember, the author wants you to take this guy's pain seriously. This panel especially is the one that confirms it. This is a pretty vulnerable bit of body language. Page 16, Ray arrives with that flower. And man, Ray, great. Now, Ray here says that the family has suffered more than Endeavor has. Which, on one note, it's like, I don't think it's the best time to have a who suffered more contest, but Endeavor was a giant dick. He kind of deserves it. If we actually think about it, though, Ray is right in what she says. If it's about the neglect of Toya and the way Endeavor treated everyone else, I can see where she's coming from. Only if she says something like everyone in the family feels that they could have done better, and that's where the guilt and regrets are coming from. Now, that's a little bit odd to think. But the clincher is the fact that Ray specifically said guilt. People that view themselves innocent and as victims don't tend to have guilt. So this bit is really crucial. What most likely is happening is that everyone feels guilty for letting things get as bad as they were, and they regret not doing better. When she says they have held the burden more than Endeavor has, she's referring to the fact that they have been aware of what Endeavor is now aware of for like years. The critical thing here, however, is to note that when it comes to people bearing the guilt, the kids cannot be held to the same standard that Ray and Endeavor can be held to. They can feel guilty and they can regret not doing something differently, but you cannot deny children the inexperience that comes hand in hand with being a child. It is unreasonable to expect a child to know what to do in emotionally intense situations that they are purposely being excluded from. What I'm trying to say is that while the children have regrets and guilt, and they can have those, they're in a position where they really only have those regrets because now they know better. There's nothing they could have done in the time. That kind of responsibility lies on the adults in the situation, and that is actually what makes Ray the more interesting person in this sense, because we don't have actually the greatest understanding of her involvement with Endeavor's descent into obsession. We only know what really happened at the tail end. Now, when it comes to the early stages, what we do know is that she was the one that suggested having more kids. And now that Ray is here, we also have to be really careful with how much blame Ray is willing to accept. Because remember, Ray is the woman that started the Endeavor redemption train by recontextualizing one of Endeavor's bad traits into a good one. Remember how she said that Endeavor was bad at letting go and how he's holding on to his family and all that? That was her recontextualizing Endeavor's stubbornness into a positive light. That's why we have to really keep an eye on Ray, because the author has used her as a tool to say, hey guys, you know, Endeavor's actually not that bad. She is the literal embodiment of the author's damage control efforts with Endeavor. So with her coming in here with the symbol of her and Endeavor's relationship, we have to be ready for some kind of blame taking coming from her. And we need to be ready to be able to actually say whether or not Ray should have any blame allotted for her if she, in the event that she actually tries to take some blame. We'll have to see how the author wants to finesse this one. So next week, if we continue the storyline, I'm actually curious as to whether or not Ray is going to slap Endeavor, because it looks like she's coming in hot in this one panel. But otherwise, I'm excited to see if she has anything new to say about the Dobby storyline. The most likely thing is that she's going to yell at Endeavor to get his ass in gear, and then we're going to start the Endeavor building himself back up storyline, and then it's going to lead into a situation where Endeavor is ultimately going to, I think Endeavor is going to have some kind of message that is able to get back or inspire some of the heroes that left and come back and bring them back into the fold and maybe calm down some of the populace. Now, as we leave this chapter, there's still many things up in the air. What's going on with Izuku? Don't know. Right now, it looks like we're going to be focused on Endeavor doing damage control on society. Will the author switch us around next week? I don't know. What is Stain going to do? I gotta think about that one a little bit longer. I'll come up with some ideas, and then maybe I'll make a video about it. But anyway, guys, let me know what you thought down below for this video. Let me know what you think about society. Let me know what you think about Endeavor. And yeah, till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.